and welcome to Magda Knits. My name is Magda and this is my little space on the internet where I talk about all of my knitting, yarn spinning and fiber dyeing. And I hope you will enjoy this episode where I talk about all of my recently finished projects. I have a couple of them and I figured it's time to start recording and sharing them with you. So I will start with talking about what I'm wearing, which is a cardigan that I finished fairly recently, and it's a design by Audrey Borrego and it's called Lenore. The top of this cardigan I guess doesn't look particularly interesting and it looks fairly plain and simple, but it has a section of color work around the waist area. But I will insert pictures so you guys can see what it looks like in full. This was actually a steeked cardigan and it was my first venture into steeking, so I will talk about all of my experience of steeking, which was I guess quite interesting, but as you can see I did succeed. I was kind of wondering whether I will be the first person in the history of knitting who will fail at steeking, but luckily it all went well. Sorry, I've got like hair all over my cardigan, obviously. This particular project, it has been knit in the Drops Flora yarn. I can't remember the name of the color, but it was, I think it might even be just called grey. It's a very light grey color, which actually is not completely solid. So when you look at the yarn, even when it was still in the ball, it looked completely solid, but as I started knitting with it, you can see tiny bits of variegation, which I think makes it really, really interesting and beautiful. There is no pulling or anything, and also the difference in shade is very, very gentle, so it almost looks a little bit heathered. But it was, I guess, something very unexpected, but I love it. For this particular project, I have used I think around 4.5 balls of the Drops Flora yarn. For the colorwork section, I've been using all sorts of little scraps that I had in my stash. So I had some of my hand-dyed yarn, I had some of my handspun yarn. Yes, I did use my handspun yarn. I used a little bit of commercially, or not commercially, it was like an indie dyed hand-dyed yarn. And I also used a little bit of Holst Garn Super Soft on one of the sections. Actually, I'm gonna stand up and just show you the colors and just explain which bit is which. So this main color here, I guess you can say it's like a beetroot shade. So this is my handspun yarn. These purple bits here and like here, this is my hand-dyed yarn. That was one of my very first hand-dyeing adventures, but it was a tiny skein and I didn't know what to do with it, so that was actually a good project to use it on. This section here, under this sort of beetroot color, and I've got bits here as well. As you can see, this is a quite big colorwork section. This is a hand-dyed fiber by Tina and Floyd. So this is, I guess, my local indie dyer. And then the grey bits here, that's Holst Garn Super Soft. Yeah, so I believe this project is great for getting rid of those little scraps. I think I've taken notes of like how much I used of each of those scraps for the colorwork section. I can't remember these from the top of my head, but it would be anything between like 9 and 20 grams. So I think it's a great project for like your little advent calendars and all those little bits and bobs that you've got hanging around in your stash. I was slightly concerned about the colorwork section because yet again I have used yarn which had slightly different thickness, especially my hand-dyed yarn, the handspun yarn, the beetroot section. It was just a little bit thicker than the other yarns, so I was worried I may end up with some puckering, but actually it all nicely evened out in the blocking. And Holst Garn, yes, I was slightly worried about that one as well. because when you have it coming out of the roll or a cone, I had this one in the form of that little mini, I think it's like 10 or 20 grams, I'm not quite sure, but essentially this yarn, before it gets washed, it's actually really thin. It blooms after washing, but while you're knitting with it, you're knitting with something really, really thin. And again, I was slightly worried that the stitches were going to be wonky and it was going to look a bit rubbish, but again, after blocking, everything evened out, and this is a nice even fabric. So that was a success. I'm super happy with it. Yeah, so as for the construction of this garment, it's a top-down design and it is designed to be steeked. Now, when you start with this cardigan, you are actually knitting flat for a while. So I think until you reach more or less like the area around your chest, or is it when you get very close to like splitting for sleeves? Well, there is quite a bit of a section where you have to knit flat, which was a bit daunting because I am not a fan of purling and it was a bit boring. And I was also a little bit stressed out because at that point I have realized that my gauge was completely off. So when I was swatching for this project, I was swatching in around, because I figured, well, if it is a steeked cardigan, then obviously I'm going to be knitting in around. So when I made the swatch, the swatch I think was 23 stitches, and I think I needed 24, something like that. I definitely was off by 1 stitch. So I was doing that swatch with 3.5mm needles, which was the recommended size, but because I was off by a stitch, I decided to go down to 2.25 to knit the garment, and I was hoping that this was going to solve the issue. However, because you start knitting flat, the gauge was all of a sudden different, because the gauge of knitting in the round and knitting flat is completely different, at least for me. So as I started to measure my gauge, I think I ended up with 26 stitches at that point. So I freaked out and I went up to 3.5 again. But at the same time, I think my brain just was so scared of not being on a gauge that at the same time I started to knit a bit looser as well. So later on, all of a sudden, I was back to like 23 stitches or something like that, and I was just getting a little bit frustrated at that point because I just couldn't get it right. But I just decided to keep going because, as you know me by now, if you watched my previous episodes, you know that I hate ripping back. So I just carried on and I wanted to see what happens. So this overall garment, I think it ended up being slightly bigger than what it was intended. However, because it is a cardigan and I will be wearing it with some knitwear underneath, it is okay for me to have it with a little bit of extra room. I'm actually wearing knitwear underneath. This is my, I think it's called Vegas top. It's just a vest, like a summer vest that I was talking about a few episodes before, just a very simple knit. But yeah, I think I've got enough room to put any other knitwear underneath, but at the same time it doesn't feel overly oversized or baggy, so I got lucky with that. What I did not get lucky with was the length. So I will insert a picture of what the original sample looked like, and this was the length that I was kind of aiming for. This is something that I wanted to achieve with the final object or the finished object, but I will now insert a picture of what it looks like on me when it comes to the length. This was a very hard lesson on not checking your row gauge. I never do that. I do admit that I don't quite like swatching. When I do swatch, I usually just check my stitch count, because I never manage to achieve the row gauge anyway, and I think it is very difficult for people to achieve both. So it's always more common to focus on your stitch gauge rather than the row gauge. And I guess depending on the type of the pattern, you kind of, sometimes you don't need to know the row gauge, because the pattern usually tells you to knit for a certain amount of, like, it's usually represented in, say, centimeters or inches rather than a number of rows. However, because in this design you have like a whole colorwork section, which is quite long, there isn't really much room to change things around. So as a result, I ended up with a cardigan that's actually quite long. I don't know what it is about my knitting. I think my stitches, I tend to make them quite long. So I need to maybe experiment and play around with different techniques just to make my knitting a little bit more, I don't know, compact. But at the same time, I don't want my stitch rows to be, stitch count to be affected. So I'm not entirely sure if there is anything that you can change about your knitting to change your row gauge. But it was a little bit frustrating. The overall length of this cardigan is nice though, because I don't mind a longer cardigan. If this was a sweater, I guess that might be a problem for me, but for a cardigan it's actually alright. I was intending to knit a long cardigan anyway. I've had my eyes on the No Frills cardigan by Petite Knit, but it was always putting me off that this garment is knit flat and you have to do so much purling that I never really got around to knitting it. But I guess this cardigan now kind of substitutes that project, because now I have a long cardigan. I don't have pockets, which the No Frills have, but maybe I could just knit little squares with colorwork section and just like slap them on top of the colorwork and just create some pockets. I don't know, but overall it's okay. But the other reason why I ended up with such a long cardigan is also because this yarn is growing quite a lot. That's another hard lesson. I really need to check the row gauge on my swatch, not just check whether I am like on point, but also just to understand what the yarn is doing after washing, because it just grew. And I guess because my swatches are really small, I wouldn't be able to tell it from such a small square that it actually got much longer, much bigger. So yeah, that garment just basically stretched after I took it out of washing. As a result, the sleeves are actually quite long, and again, it doesn't bother me that much, because if I again think about the cardigan and how I would wear it, and you know, when it's a bit cold you want to get like cozy, I actually don't mind to have my sleeves longer. I tend to pull my sleeves a little bit long sometimes just to get a bit like nice and cozy. But what I can do as well is I can just fold these cuffs and just have it like this, which I think is not too bad. I still have that line from blocking. What do you guys do just to get rid of those lines? I guess I should steam block it, isn't it? Just to make it nice and round. Oh well. Yeah, so that was a bit of a lesson on swatching. I need to be a little bit better at that and just pay a little bit more attention to what I'm doing with the swatches. Right, so oh, steeking, yes. So with the construction, as I said, you are knitting flat and then eventually you knit in a round, because you join in a round, and then you knit back and forth, and then you are creating the area for steeking in the middle. So obviously I did that, and then it came steeking time. So as I mentioned, did I mention it? Maybe. It was my first time steeking, so I was a little bit nervous. I have watched a couple of videos on steeking. Audrey also includes a video in her pattern. I think it might be a link to the Very Pink Knits. I can't remember, but there is a video included, and I watched a few of them. But I still was a little bit confused. So my initial plan was to do the reinforcement by the crochet hook, but then also do it with the sewing machine. I mean, you know, when you are steeking for the first time, you are freaked out, so I wasn't quite sure how this was going to turn out, so I wanted to stay on the safe side and do both. So I watched videos on both of these techniques, and they all seemed very simple, very straightforward, but when it came to actually doing it, I was really confused. First of all, when I was doing the crocheted reinforcement, it all made perfect sense when I was watching the videos, but as I got to my garments, I realized that my stitches are wonky. My color work is not particularly neat and things can look a little bit funny. And also, like with the Holst yarn being very thin, because that was clearly before washing, and then other yarns being thicker, the section in the middle is also the section where you're like, it was the beginning of the round as well. So things are a little bit misaligned and wonky and horrible. So I really struggled to understand which leg of the V on the stitch I should be picking up. I felt like I wasn't doing it properly, and I freaked out a little bit because I was worried that if I pick it up incorrectly, then the whole thing will unravel, and I just decided to abandon the idea of going for the crocheted hook or the crocheted reinforcement. So then I figured, okay, let me just take out my sewing machine and let's just do it with the sewing machine. Initially, I was a little bit worried about it as well because I don't really trust my sewing skills either. Like, again, if you watched my previous episodes, you know I'm a very novice sewist or sewer. What's the word, by the way, guys? Like, I hear people saying sewists, but then I hear people saying sewers. I think sewers is more like a British pronunciation. I don't know, but you know what I mean. I'm not experienced, basically. That's what I'm trying to say here. So I was a little bit scared what I'm going to do with the fabric because I was just really worried that, you know, with knitwear, it's actually quite stretchy. So I was worried I was going to stretch it while I'm sewing. So I was a really bit scared of that as well. But because I failed at the crochet reinforcement, I kind of had no choice. And I also got really confused. This is silly, okay? But I was really confused about it because all the videos that I saw about the sticking and reinforcing it on the sewing machine, they would represent it or they would show it on like a little swatch. It would be just a flat little square just to show you how to do it. That's great, but when you have your actual garment, it's knitted in a round. Surely, well, clearly, you can't just like run it flat through your sewing machine because you're going to be sewing the front to the back, right? You need to kind of like open it and like slide it into the I keep wanting to say washing machine, sewing machine. So you kind of need to like wedge it in to make sure that you're just sewing over the top. But that surely can result in things just being really stretched out. So I was really worried about that, and I was like, is there a technique to it? How do I do it? Do I maybe cut it first and then sew it? It was just, yeah, I know it's stupid, but I was really, really confused. But in the end, I just decided to go for it. I got a bit frustrated at that point. I was like, let me just run it through the machine, and yeah, I just kind of like wedged it in, and it wasn't a problem at all. It was completely fine. I didn't stretch anything. I was being slow and careful. Obviously, I didn't run it like super quickly, but it was fine. There was no problem with that, and there was no reason to be worried about it. So if you guys ever try steeking, and if you guys ever wonder like how to do it, just wedge it in and just do it gently. Try not to pull the fabric and just don't go too fast. Just do it very slowly. So when I had the edges reinforced, then I just cut it. That was the most liberating thing that I've done with my knitting, I think. Probably everyone has the same experience of steeking. It just feels really counterintuitive to cut into your fabric, but it is what it is, and then you just end up with a cardigan. then you can finally try it on like properly and see how it's going to sit on the body. Of course, you can still try it on while it's still joined in around, and I did that a number of times just to see how it was fitting. But yeah, this was, you know, this is the first time you see it in like an open form. So yeah, after the steeking was done, then I picked up for the ribbing here for the button bands, and yeah, followed the instructions. The instructions, by the way, on this pattern are very well written. I really like Audrey's patterns. I've knitted one of her patterns before, and yeah, she's really good at explaining things. She's got a very good style of writing. Yeah, so I picked up for the band. I'm still missing the buttons. I don't know what color I want. I think originally I wanted to have something that's completely grey and it's like identical or very similar to the main color. But because I don't really have like a local haberdashery, I would probably have to buy the buttons online. But I don't know, I just had some disappointing experiences with buying online when it comes to the color results that I was receiving, and I feel like the colors on my screens of all of my devices, they're just a little bit off, and then I just get a bit disappointed with what I get. So I think I'm just a little bit scared to get something that's the wrong color. But yeah, I will think about it. Maybe I will just decide to go for like a contrasting color, and I'll get something in one of the shades that my color work is in. I don't know. To be honest, I'm probably not going to, well, I will definitely not wear it closed, because where the buttons would go would be pretty much around like my waist and down, so that would look a bit funny. So I might just leave it without the buttons. Why not? But what I wanted to say as well about the steeking, oh yes, so what I really liked about this pattern, and I don't know if it's always like this with steeking, when I watched the video tutorials, I felt like this wasn't included in any of the steeks. So I don't know if it's just something that Audrey did or whether it is common, but the videos that I happened to watch didn't have it. Essentially, the great thing about this one was that on the border between the regular fabric and the steek section, in between those sections you had like a purl row or purl column. And I found this to be great to have it on both sides, because as I started picking up the stitches, it was so incredibly easy for me to understand where I'm supposed to be picking up the stitches. I am not great at picking up stitches. I've messed this up a number of times and I actually don't like doing it. But I found it incredibly easy for me to follow that purl column. So as I say, I don't know if it is a common thing in steeking, but if I do any steeked projects in the future, and I'm pretty sure I will because I actually enjoy the process, if the design doesn't have that bit, I will do it myself, because I just really found it extremely useful to have, just to guide me and understand where I'm supposed to be picking up for the button band. And yeah, so the steek, well, I've got the steek here. It's messy, so you've got all those bits hanging out here, and as much as I watched the videos on the whole process of steeking, like up to the cutting point, I haven't watched anything about what you're supposed to do afterwards, because I don't quite like the look of it. I don't know if it's going to be showing much when I'm actually wearing this garment, but yeah, this isn't really neat. So what are you supposed to do? I think I've heard people talking about like sewing a ribbon down here. So perhaps that's something I could do. But are there any other solutions that are available to sort of finish off a steek so that it's nice and neat? Yeah, let me know, because I don't quite like that finish at this point. And what else do I have about this cardigan? Yes, the colorwork section. I just remembered that there were a few rows in the colorwork chart where you have to knit 3 different colors on the same row. I must say I did not enjoy it. I found it frustrating to be juggling all those yarns hanging from my knitting, and I just don't quite like it. I went for it during the first few rows, and then sort of in the middle section, I think. Yes, so you end up with a row where you have to knit with 3 colors, but at the same time you also have to catch some of these colors on the back of your you have to catch the floats on the back of your knitting, because the sections are actually quite wide. And I was like, that is just too much for me, because I hate catching floats as it is anyway, and then having 3 colors in the same row, just too much. So I decided to change this section. I don't know which section it was and how I changed it, but it is different. So if you were to inspect this this garment really closely and compare it to the original, you would then see that I changed it. But yeah, I just had to, because it was just a little bit too much. I just got cut off. My camera doesn't allow me to record for longer than 20 minutes, I think, so that was a really long ramble about this cardigan. But I think I've just mentioned everything that I wanted to say about it anyway. So I will now move on to talk about my second finished object, which is a pair of socks. So these are the socks that I was mentioning in my previous episode that were taking absolutely forever, because I started these back in, I think, April or the beginning of May. And they were just taking forever because I just got bored of knitting socks. I lost my sock knitting mojo and I just couldn't bring it back. I really wanted this pair to bring it back, because I was hoping that if I knit like a textured sock, got the textured section here on the front of the foot, I was hoping that it will be fun and I will enjoy knitting socks again, but I didn't. I think the reason why I didn't is because I don't like knitting with this yarn. I'm sorry. I actually don't enjoy it. It's very, very ropey and unpleasant. This is the Woolyknit yarn. This is their sock yarn. It's called, I think it's just called Woolyknit Cone Wool and Nylon blend. I think it's like 20% nylon, so like typical sock yarn. And yeah, it just feels really ropey and unpleasant, and just the whole experience of using this yarn wasn't really great. But I have used this yarn before, and I have realized that maybe it is actually a good time for me to kind of report back on how this yarn is wearing, how it's behaving. Because I have made a pair of socks for my partner last winter in exactly the same yarn, but in a different color. Now, apologies, this sock looks a bit funny because obviously it has been worn. I did not put it on the blocker. I did not prepare myself really for this episode. But I just want to show you what this yarn looks like after quite a lot of wear. He didn't wear it like a crazy amount. I think I finished these kind of towards the end of the winter. But he is quite heavy with wearing his socks. And the way the yarn behaves, I must say that when it comes to the front of this sock, so the part that doesn't really get that much rubbing, it looks perfectly fine. There is barely any pilling, so it almost looks brand new. Mind you, like I say, he wore them like quite a few times, and I think I washed these like quite a few times as well. So they have gone through the washing process, but I have been washing them by hand. I don't know if you can put them in the washing machine. Well, probably like on a wool cycle, yes, but I don't do that. So I wash them by hand. But they've been wearing pretty well on the outside. They look almost new, so there is no pilling or anything. but on the bottom of the foot, they got completely felted. So I'm not sure if you can see, but like, so this is like a 2x2 ribbing, and you can barely see that ribbing now compared to like the front where it's like nice and neat. This all got quite felted, and it's a little bit felted on the heel as well. So yeah, so I thought I'll let you know how this yarn holds up. Obviously it didn't really have, like, it didn't develop any holes. And that's interesting, I guess, because it got felted, so it makes me think that felting actually reinforces the yarn. So I feel like he will not get any holes, because this is now a really strong fabric here on the bottom of the foot. So in that sense, it's actually pretty good. The yarn got just a little bit softer after washing, but I wouldn't say it softened a high amount. So if you like your socks to be really soft and nice and cozy, I don't think you will enjoy this yarn. It's not itchy because there is no fluff, or it's not fuzzy. It's just really ropey, and it just feels really harsh because of that. And yeah, like I say, it doesn't really change much after washing. So that's what happened to my partner's socks. I will report back on what happens to mine. I am not as heavy on wearing my socks, so it will be interesting to see what happens. I tend to develop holes on the, is it called the ball of your foot? Like the bottom part just below the toes. So this is where I tend to have the holes on my socks the most. So let's see if I'm going to end up with like a felted section. So yes, I will definitely let you know what happens. And yeah, these socks, well, I didn't follow any pattern, by the way. I was just making it up as I went. I felt very inspired by all those textured sweaters that I've seen in the last few months, where you have like sections of like different twisted stitches, or like knit and purl stitches, just to create like a little textured effect. And I just went for it. I've made some mistakes because I did not enjoy this project, so I didn't really pay attention much to what I was doing, and as a result, these textured sections are not completely mirroring themselves. I've messed up some of these sections. I kind of swapped them around by accident, and also I've realized that the last row before I started decreasing for the toes was a purl row on the first sock, but I forgot to do it on the second, so that's like a really visible difference. But oh well, it's fine. Yeah, I'm just happy I'm done with them. So yeah, I was hoping that I will bring my sock knitting mojo back with yarn spinning, because I was spinning for socks, but unfortunately I didn't bring my mojo, and I will explain why in a minute. But before I do that, I'm just gonna quickly jump onto my whip, my knitting whip, because I am fully aware that spinning is not everyone's cup of tea, and you may not be interested in that. So let's stick around with knitting for this couple of minutes, just so I can show you my current work in progress. So this is the Wild Posy by Melody Hoffmann, and this is the Luna version. So Melody provides two versions of this sweater. There is a Luna and Flora. And basically the only difference between them really is the textured section here is just slightly different. I think the Flora version, it has like a lacy bit here. This one is more closed. And yeah, I really like this pattern. I will talk about it in more detail after it's finished, because I tend to do that. I just talk about the whole thing at the end. But this is just a little teaser for the next episode, when I will be talking about it in full. The only thing that I will mention at this point is that I'm just slightly worried about the puckering that I've got here around the this textured section here in the middle. I think I was pulling the yarn a little bit too tight. Maybe my gauge was a little bit too tight, and I think it's cinching in a little bit, but I do hope it's going to be fixed by blocking. Hopefully. I'm knitting this in the recommended yarn, so this is the Plow to Loop yarn in the color Oatmeal Heather. Beautiful color, I really like it. I think this color kind of grew on me, and I love it. I'm holding the Plow to Loop as a double strand, and this is the first time I'm working with unspun yarn, and I really kick myself for putting it off for so long, because I really like the fabric it creates. It's just, I don't know what it is about it, I just love it. So I'm really looking forward to finishing this and having it for winter. This is going to be a lovely cozy sweater. So that's coming in the next episode. And let's talk about spinning now. In my previous episode I did mention that I was doing a spin for socks. I was doing a 3-ply yarn in a wool top that I got from World of Wool. It was called Fireside, and at that point I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to spin an opposing ply or whether I would go for a traditional 3-ply. I decided to go for the opposing ply. And if you have seen my previous episodes where I was spinning for socks and you remember how much I was moaning about the process, how much I hated it, this has brought all the memories back. Well, not quite all of the memories. I didn't get as tangled as I did last time. I think last time it was even more horrible. But I think the whole process was really frustrating. I've got the finished yarn here, by the way, and I will insert a picture as well. Essentially what I ended up with is something extremely and very heavily overspun. I did similar thing with the previous yarn. It was very overspun, and in a way the opposing ply yarn is supposed to be quite overspun, or at least the one that you do for sock knitting, because you really want to add this twist to create the strength. And with my previous yarn, I guess I kind of managed to reach that balance. So that yarn was overspun, but I think it was very much on the border, and it was still very usable, and I was able to knit with it and create a nice fabric with it. But this, I pushed it a little bit too far. So this is extremely overspun. Now you won't be able to see how badly it is overspun at this end because it's close to the end, so the yarn started to unspin itself anyway. But if I went somewhere more to the middle of this ball, it would just be completely kinked up. It's very ropey, it's very unpleasant, and I ended up with loads of pigtails while I was plying. Yeah, now I've got like a little messy end here. I pushed it too far, and I was drying it with a weight hanging from this cane just to kind of try to pull it down. And even though it helped a little bit, this is still kind of kinking up on itself and curling up on itself. So it is, I've pushed it too far. And I have also realized this when I started knitting. So my original idea was again just to have some textured socks, because again I was hoping that, you know, this is going to be fun and I will have some lovely textured socks from my own handspun yarn. I figured that texture would show up on this quite nicely because it actually ended up to be a quite solid color. So in terms of color, it is slightly disappointing as well, because the wool top had loads of different beautiful shades that unfortunately got completely lost in this very tight twist. As Gillian Moreno mentions in her Yarn Texture book, the amount of spin that you add into your yarn, it actually affects the colors. So the more twist you add, the more the colors kind of become blended together and you just can't really see those individual shades. But at the end of the day, this was really a spin where the aim was more focused on like the practical side of the yarn rather than like the beauty of it and the colors and stuff. So I was okay with like sacrificing the color a bit. And yeah, so I figured that if I do like a textured pattern, it will work nice with this yarn. But as I started knitting, and I can't remember what pattern it was now, but as I started knitting with it, I realized that because you can really see the twist in here, and the yarn was kind of kinking up a little bit, even in the actual fabric of the sock, you couldn't really see that texture. So I didn't really want to carry on because that would be a waste of time to put all this effort in all those knits and purls and twisted stitches and whatnot, and then you wouldn't be even able to see the end result. So I ripped back to the cuff, and I started knitting plain stockinette. So I was thinking, let me just do a plain stockinette, it's fine, like I just need a new pair of socks. But that high twist resulted in the fabric really going on a bias, like extremely. Sorry, I had to stop the recording. That was the postman. I was hoping he would bring some yarn, but actually I didn't buy anything, so I don't know why I expected yarn, but I think now my brain associates the postman with yarn. Anyway, I was talking about my handspun. So yes, the fabric went completely on a bias, and it was just really disappointing. These socks would not be usable at all. I think what I would end up probably, like, they would just keep twisting on my feet. And probably towards the end of the day I would end up with the heels on top of my foot. So it's just not working. So I think what I'm going to do is I will, when I finish my current spin, and at the moment I'm spinning again still my Ryland fiber. This was on the wheel in the meantime, so I took a break from that Ryland fiber, but I will be back to spinning it. I'm actually almost finished with the first bobbin, so maybe when I'm done with that, I'll basically put this back on the wheel, and I'm going to try to take out some of that spin from the ply, and hopefully that's going to help and make it more usable, because right now it's a completely wasted fiber and wasted yarn, which is a real shame. But fingers crossed it is going to help. It's the first time I will be taking out a twist from a finished yarn, so I guess that's going to be an experience. And one thing that I wanted to mention as well about the process of it. So spinning this fiber, and I don't know what fiber content it really has. I know there is nylon in it because it was a wool top, like a typical sort of sock blend, so it had some nylon in it, and the rest of the fiber I think it was referred to as just wool, and I don't know what kind of wool it was, but essentially I did not enjoy spinning this fiber. It was quite slippery. It had a short staple length, so I felt like I just had to, like, I couldn't really adjust my wheel well enough, and like my drafting technique to just become completely comfortable. And because I was adding a lot of twist onto this yarn, then it just made this whole process much more difficult than what it was meant to be. So I really stopped enjoying this process at one point, and this was just sitting on my wheel for quite some time. I took a break from spinning because of this. And then I just happened to watch one of the latest videos of, is it called Wool and Spin podcast? I think it's Rachel Smith. I can't remember what the episode was about, but she just happened to mention, just as a matter of fact, that she likes to do cross-lacing on her wheel. And I was like, what's cross-lacing? I've never heard of it. Like, what is it? And I started looking into it. And she also briefly mentioned what it is in that podcast episode, but she also refers viewers to read her blog post about it. And yeah, I just kind of started Googling what it was. I tried to watch some videos to understand what it was. And actually, it's a technique that you can use on your wheel to kind of slow down the uptake of your wheel, and it's very commonly used when you are spinning very fine yarn. So this is very often used by people who spin lace yarn. And I figured this could actually help me with my current project, because I was going very thin, because I was aiming to end up with a fingering weight yarn, and it was meant to be a 3-ply, so I knew that I had to have the singles really thin. And at the same time, I felt like when I was spinning it, the yarn just kept being pulled from my hands. I felt like I was constantly fighting against the fiber, and I was really adjusting my wheel, like the brake was barely on. Like I felt like, so I've got the Scotch tension on my wheel, I've got the Ashford Joy too, and I felt like it was almost loose, that like that spring that holds the brake was like completely flat and almost floppy, and I was like, there is nothing else I can really do with my wheel to reduce the uptake, and I just felt like this was not working. When I tried cross-lacing, that was like a miracle. It changed the whole experience so much. So essentially, just to, like, for those of you who don't know what cross-lacing is, because I didn't, essentially you just, so when you've got your wheel and you've got the yarn, yeah, you can call it yarn at that point, I guess, but you've got the singles coming out from your bobbin, and then you run them or attach them to your hooks on one side, and then it goes to the orifice, and then you spin it, then it comes to your hands. That's the kind of, I guess, traditional or like a typical setup that you would have on your wheel. But with cross-lacing, what you do is, as it goes through the orifice, then around the hooks, then you actually attach that yarn to the other side of your flyer, or if you've got hooks on the other side, you could actually attach it to the hooks on the other side. I think I really explain it in a really rubbish way, but I hope what you mean. I've got a picture of what I did on my wheel to do the cross-lacing. So essentially, I don't have hooks on my wheel, it's just that sliding thing, but I decided just to, like, I didn't hook it into the other hole on the other side. I just kind of let it rest on the part of the orifice. The picture will explain what I did. Oh my god, like I can't explain it. Anyway, the idea behind this whole setup is that the singles now, because of that extra length, they have actually more distance from your hands to the bobbin, and as a result, it has more time to get more twist. And for some reason, I don't know why, it also slows the uptake on your wheel. So you don't feel like you are fighting against the fiber. You can just completely relax, and you've got all the time in the world to draft and prepare the fiber for entering the orifice. So I finally took pleasure from the whole process, and I could finish this yarn because I thought it was going to take absolutely forever. What Rachel also mentioned, and I think I misunderstood it, so help me out, guys. But what I thought she said, and I think that's what I also understood from her blog, but I am sure I must have misunderstood it. But what she mentions is that, oh, by the way, what happens with cross-lacing is also that for some reason you don't have to then change the hooks on your wheel, because the yarn fills the bobbin evenly without changing the hooks. That's how I understood it. But it didn't make sense, because it surely wouldn't just keep sliding on your bobbin and fill the bobbin really nicely and evenly. Like, you need to move it, you need to change the hooks, right? I tried it and it didn't work, so I'm pretty sure I misunderstood that part, but tell me I'm wrong, because I would love to have the ability of just spinning and not changing the hooks. Well, as I said, I don't have the hooks, I have the sliding thing, but I wish I didn't have to slide it. I would love to end up with this nice and even bobbin. But it's impossible to do that without manually sliding it, is it? I don't know. But anyway, That's the spin for socks. Very unsuccessful one, but hopefully I can save this yarn, and if I can, then obviously I will show it to you. Yeah, and my current spin, as I said, I'm spinning my rayon fiber, so I'm spinning for the shifty sweater. I'm still absolutely not on the contrasting colors. It's still the main body, the main yarn. I'm still playing around with the ideas of what I would like to have as a contrast, but yeah, we'll get to it in a bit, but that's not quite the time yet. And again, let me just look at the time. Yeah, it's not going to switch off. While we're on spinning as well, so I really wanted to get myself an issue of the Ply magazine. So I purchased the prep episode because I was working on my rayon fiber, so I was doing all the carding and blending, and I just wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about preparing the fiber in general. And I figured that Ply magazine seems to be a really good source of information. Everyone is talking about various articles from the Ply magazine, so I really wanted to get one of the issues. I did not subscribe. I think I'm at this point in my life where I'm pretty much cancelling all of my possible subscriptions. But it is still possible just to have like single issues, the back issues. And I think that works better for me because I feel like I'm not kind of tied to anything, and I can just make a decision that I can buy a single issue at whatever point I wish. And at the same time, because this magazine, I think every issue is around a different topic, and I feel like maybe not all of them would be of interest for me, at least not at this point. And I figured I don't really want to subscribe. I want to have the ability of choosing which one I would like to purchase. Like, I'm not really into spindle spinning, so if there is an issue about spindle spinning or like art yarn, which I'm not so much into either, then I don't necessarily need that episode issue. So I figured I'm just gonna kind of try to get a little pile of the back issues of the Ply magazine. This is the first one that I got. I have like a whole list of the other ones that I would like to buy, so I will gradually get a bigger collection. So yeah, this is a great resource of information. I really love reading it, but also like just looking through the images. It's a very pretty magazine, and it's packed with information. Oh my gosh, I haven't read everything yet, but like I'm learning a ton already. So I'm very excited to put some of these things into use. So yeah, I would definitely highly recommend the magazine. And the prep issue is actually very, very informative. It talks about all of those hand carding, drum carding. It talks about preparing fiber in general for spinning. Okie dokie. So, oh yes, now let's talk about fiber dyeing. Okay, but I need to hit the pause button because it might be a long story. Okay guys, so let's hit the rock bottom now with my crafts, and let's talk about natural dyeing. I have tried some natural dyeing before, but I am definitely inexperienced, so I didn't really even have my hopes up at that point. But what I got as a result was quite surprising. Like, I didn't even expect that. But anyway, let me build up the story really of what really happened. So essentially, I was growing some hollyhocks in my garden. I planted a hollyhock plant, I think 2 summers ago, and it is this very dark purple, like almost like a burgundy color flower. So I figured it will be great for dyeing, so I purposefully planted it in my garden. However, this year we have noticed that by our kitchen window on the flower bed, there was some a mysterious plant growing, and as it started to get bigger and bigger, as it started to develop leaves, it really started to look to me like a hollyhock. And even like when the little buds of flowers starting to appear, I was like, this looks like hollyhock. And I even took my phone, and you know, our phones nowadays, they have the on my phone, I think on Android phones, it's called lens. Like the camera has the option that's called lens, and basically what you do is you just hover your phone with the picture over an object, and then when you take a picture with the lens option, it takes you to like Google results to tell you what the object is, right? So that's how you can recognize plants and whatnot. So when I did that, I got results that it's a hollyhock. And even when the flowers opened up, they really looked like hollyhocks. So I'm like, this is probably some wild hollyhock that just appeared mysteriously in our garden. Probably the birds, you know, brought the seeds, whatever. It did not look anything like the one that I had, because the flowers had a slightly different shade. They were purple as well, but they were more like on the pinkish side. But I got really excited because, you know, that meant I had more hollyhock flowers in my garden, and I could pick them for dyeing. So I was picking those little flowers, and that wild hollyhock, it had very small flowers. So the other one that I planted myself, they actually were quite big flowers, but this one had really small flowers, but plenty of them. And that plant grew extremely tall. It was much taller than me, and there were plenty of flowers. Now, when I pick flowers for dyeing, or you know what, like I don't have the tendency of picking flowers for my garden. I have this thing in my head that the flowers belong in the garden, and I don't want to cut the flowers while they're in bloom, because I feel like I'm taking the beauty away from my garden. So I tend not to take the flowers while they're in bloom. And so I was waiting for the flowers just to die from the plant and just fall to the ground. And actually, I think one of the videos that I was watching about dyeing with hollyhocks, one of the ladies was doing exactly the same thing. She was just picking all those flowers from under the plants after they died. And that's what I did. And I was picking those tiny flowers throughout the whole summer, pretty much, because that plant just kept growing and kept producing flowers. I had like a little box of little flowers, and then my original hollyhock plants started blooming, then the flowers died. I picked them up as well. So I think as a result, I had something around like 55 grams of flowers, which is quite a lot, because if you think about the fact that they were dry flowers, which means they were very light, it was, you know, I had quite a lot of it. I had quite a lot of the dyeing material, and I was really excited to start dyeing with it. I didn't, I guess, quite have enough. So the book that I have on natural dyeing, it's got like a little recipe for dyeing with hollyhock, and I think it mentions that you should have the same amount of dyeing material as you have the fiber. So I guess I could have taken 50 grams of fiber for 50 grams of the dye material, but I felt like 50 grams was not really enough. 50 grams of fiber was not really enough to kind of use for anything. So I figured, okay, I'm just going to take 100 grams of fiber, because I really don't mind if the result is a little bit more pale. So I took 100 grams of some fiber that I had in my stash. I don't know what sheep breed it was. I have used up all of my Rayland fiber, so this was the only white undyed fiber that I had in my stash that wasn't like a commercial wool top. So I didn't really want to use those nice commercial wool tops. I wanted to use just raw fleece and then just card it myself and dye it and spin it. That was the idea. And so that's what I did. The fiber was quite dirty, in the sense that it definitely didn't have any lanolin on it, so I didn't have to do like the scouring, but I had to remove some of the vegetable matter because it just had full of leaves and just stuff in it. But yeah, so I prepared the dye bath from the flowers. The fiber was, I've put the fiber in mordant because I decided to mordant it first. I think, again, the book that I was referring to, I think it mentions that you can do it without mordanting as well, but if you put it in the mordant, you get sort of stronger results, better results. So while the fiber was mordanting, I was preparing the dye bath. I soaked the flowers, so I was, again, following the recipe from the book. I'll put a picture of the book that I'm talking about, by the way, if you're curious. So I soaked the flowers first in cold water. I soaked them for a whole day. I think the recipe says you're supposed to soak it overnight. I did it in the morning. So in the evening I started simmering the flowers. The flowers were simmering for about 45 minutes to an hour. At that point, you could really see the color. It was really dark purple, so I was very excited. I had my hopes up. I was like, this is going to be great. Whatever color it turns, really, because I know from experience that the dye bath doesn't really give you any indication of what the final yarn will look like or fiber is going to look like. Sometimes you can end up with a completely different color. But anyway, I had my hopes up at that point. You know, any result is a good result. So that simmered for about an hour, and then I left it overnight to cool down completely. And in the morning I removed all the flowers and I just had the dye bath with the colors. At that point, see, I can't remember that bit that much, but I do remember that I took like a little bit of, yes, I think I did that while I was still simmering the flowers, just to have like a little bit of an indication of what color I could be getting. And at that point, when the flowers were simmering and they were very hot, I took a little piece of like kitchen towel and I just put a little corner in the water just to see what kind of shade I could potentially be getting. And it was very strange because it looked very like brownish, grayish brown kind of thing. And what was interesting is that as this towel started to dry, while it was still damp, but it wasn't as wet anymore, it started to turn green, which was very interesting. And then as it dried completely, it was purple. It was a very pale purple. So I found this incredibly interesting and I was very excited about it because that just made me think, I don't know what color I'm going to get whatsoever. But yes, after I finished simmering, I left it to cool and the next day I was ready for dyeing. So I have put all that dye bath into the like a tray that I use for dyeing, and before I put the fiber in, I actually took tiny samples into 2 small jars because I was really curious to see if any modifiers could actually change the color of this dye bath. So the water at that point looked it looked this kind of dark brownish gray color. Unfortunately, I didn't take a picture of the little samples that I took because in one of them I have put a little bit of baking soda and that turned the color into like dark green. And to the other one I have decided to put a little bit of citric acid and that has turned the color into like magenta, like a dark magenta. So the modifiers definitely had an effect, but I figured, you know what, let's leave the modifiers out. I just want to see the color that I'm going to get from this pure hollyhock extract. So I added the fiber in. Again, at that point it looked quite brownish, I guess, but I knew that perhaps when the yarn dries or after it's been simmering for a while, it could potentially end up in a completely different color. I was really prepared for any color whatsoever. So it was simmering for about an hour, I think. Then I left it to cool. And at that point already, I could see that this is not going well. But I was like, okay, let me just leave it to cool. I'm just gonna leave it overnight. Things will get better, Magda. Like, you will get a good result, don't worry. Tomorrow it will be all fine. But it wasn't. So, I'm like building up to what I ended up with, right? Let me just first show you the picture of the fiber, like what it looked like before I put it in a dye bath, okay? So that's what it looked like. What I ended up with after this whole process that I just described, this is what I ended up with. I feel like I'm gonna put some drum rolls probably. So that's the result. I'm just gonna sit here and wait for you guys to stop laughing, and I'll carry on in a minute. Or let's have a minute of silence. Because, I mean, as I said, I was prepared for anything, right? But at least I wanted to have a result, like anything, any color whatsoever. What I did not expect is that I was just gonna end up with nothing. It just got dirty somehow, but it didn't have any color. I think the picture that you see on the screen, you might maybe see just a tiny shade of purple somewhere, somehow. But, I mean, this is nothing. I was so angry. I mean, the rage when I thought about me picking all those tiny flowers throughout the whole summer just to end up with nothing. I was so angry. I was just like, I'm done. I was angry at nature. I was angry at natural dyeing. I was like, this is horrible. So I got so angry, I just threw it straight away into acid dyes. That's what I ended up with afterwards, after I put it in the acid dyes. Let me grab it, actually. At least I have some color here, right? I mean, that's far from natural dyeing, but at least I have some colors. And I think they're pretty good colors, so it's a kind of like a dark red shade. I mean, what else to say? Guys, I could literally just switch this camera off and just finish it off here, because I just have nothing else to say about this whole thing. It was just so extremely disappointing. But yeah, acid dyes saved the day, so I did the dyeing in the fleece, and then I put it in the carder, and this is what I ended up with, those 3 bats. I think I'm going to spin this in a 2-ply. I've got around like 100 grams in here. I still have some vegetable matter in here, but I think I'll pick it up when I divide it into smaller pieces for spinning. But I don't know if I will try natural dyeing ever again. I am so disappointed. I am looking at the acorns that are developing on the oak tree that we've got in the garden, and I might do some dyeing with them, but I don't know. At this point, I'm so discouraged that I don't know if I want to put all this time and effort just to get no result. Honestly, and I even began to wonder whether this was even wool, because I was thinking maybe that wasn't wool. Maybe someone gave me a bag of nylon or plastic and I wasn't spinning wool. But it had loads of like leaves and stuff in it, so it must have come from an animal, right? I don't know what I did wrong, guys. Or maybe that plant wasn't a hollyhock after all. It looked like a hollyhock, but maybe it wasn't. You know, nature can trick us sometimes. And yeah, I just wasted my whole summer just to get nothing. Okay, I'm just gonna stop talking about it. I can never get over it, and I could just keep moaning about it forever and ever, but there is no point. So yeah, let's stop talking about it. And yeah, let me just quickly tell you about the plans that I have for after I finish my wild Posy. The plan is that I would like to knit my partner a vest. It's not supposed to be any kind of fashion statement or anything. It's supposed to be a practical vest that he can wear under his work clothes. So he works as a mechanic, and so he works almost like outside for most of the day. Like, okay, he works in the workshop, but they've got like massive doors that's constantly opened, so it's almost like working outside. And in winter it can really get unpleasant, and like when he's done with like fixing a customer's bike, then he needs to take it for a ride. He's a motorcycle mechanic, by the way, so like when the motorcycle is finished, then he needs to go for a ride just to check if everything is, you know, working fine. So in winter it can be really cold and unpleasant, so he really needs to dress warm. So I was thinking I'm just going to knit him like a vest that he can wear underneath just to keep him warm. So I found a design called Neat, and it's by James McIntosh. Very simple design, nothing, you know, extraordinary or interesting about it. So I'm not even sure if I'm going to show it to you in this podcast, because it's just going to be a very boring project to share. But yeah, I might, because it's the first time I'll be working with the yarn. So I purchased the Drops Lima yarn, which is a DK weight yarn, and this is the first time I'll be working with it. So maybe I will mention when it's done, just to let you know how I liked working with it, and maybe later on I'll let you know how it's wearing and stuff. But that's the plan that I have for after my wild posy. And what I wanted to knit for myself, so I had an idea for a very long time, and I put it onto my Make 9 list back in January, was a pair of like jogging bottoms, with the idea of having like a loungewear knitted myself for like colder months. But it's now evolved into an idea that I would like to knit myself some leggings. So I got quite a lot of this Drops Lima. I think I got 20 balls. They had a promotion at the moment, so I think it was £1.30 per ball. They come in 50-gram balls. So I've got 20 balls, and I figured that I should have enough for the vest and for a pair of leggings for myself. So I'm going to knit the leggings from the same yarn. So that's going to be happening very soon, and I will report back, obviously, with my next episode. I will show you how it's all going, and I am going to show you my finished object, my wild posy, at that point as well. Don't know when that's going to happen. I know I'm very irregular with recording my episodes, but it is hard, and as I mentioned before, I very much want to focus my episodes mostly around finished objects, just so I can talk about them in full. But yeah, so that's all I had for you for today. I hope you recovered from my natural dyeing experience by now. I certainly haven't. But yeah, I'm just gonna now go and cry in a corner. So you guys have a wonderful day, evening, night, whatever time of the day it is at your place. And hopefully I will see you next time. Bye bye.